Well, a little bit about me. I am going to be speaking on ethics and aging. My name is Oscar Noriega. I'm an attorney practicing law here in San Antonio, Texas. I work in the areas of elder law and healthcare law. With regard to my background, I graduated from Notre Dame undergrad, SMU Law School up in Dallas, Texas. After graduating, I went working with Healthcare Financing Administration in Baltimore, Maryland. And then I continued working with Healthcare Financing Administration in Dallas, Texas. And then after finishing that, came down here, opened my private practice, and now we do a general practice of elder law and healthcare law. We focus on not only Medicare, Medicaid questions, but other questions routinely faced by seniors. And also we advise, assist, represent healthcare professionals on their questions. And now, that's enough about me. So what we're going to be talking about today is generally one of the big questions that we routinely face is when people are facing routine questions and problems. And this goes even beyond what is faced by legal questions, is the process of people making a decision. While my discussion will be primarily focused on how it involves attorneys and whether it's legally binding, whether it's a good decision, it applies really in all circumstances. One thing is that as healthcare professionals, as general professionals, we generally come across people when they're facing a crisis. Really the whole focus of whether there was a good decision made actually becomes more and more exaggerated. Because in extreme situations there become challenges, or whether there's even doubt whether there was a true decision made, a good decision, intelligent decision made, whether people can act on it and depend on it. One of the things is a basic thing is, does the person have the capacity to make the decision? Does the person have the physical ability to be able to understand the problem that they're facing? And that's really not going to be the focus of this discussion. It's really going to be much more on the importance of providing necessary information to somebody to make a decision. One of the things that people sometimes as professionals we dismiss, or we don't really truly realize, is that how actually important it is to give information. One of the things is that as an attorney, physicians dealing in situations, it's actually one of the things that our key role is we're teachers. And sometimes that really is not emphasized nearly enough, is that when it works really well, in the ideal situation, we actually are educators. We actually are bringing the person up to speed quickly on the crisis that they're facing. One of the things that happens is that as me as an attorney and all of you in your various fields, is that we deal with these situations on a routine basis. We actually will see people we'll see basically people having a crisis with Alzheimer's, a Medicaid qualification. We'll see situations like that over and over and over and over again. For us, it becomes fairly routine to see in the course of a year 20, 30, 40, 50 situations like that. But for a lot of these people, when they're going through their situation, their crisis, actually for them, that's the first and maybe the only time that they'll ever see that. And one of the biggest things that is, because it's the first time that they ever see something like that, one of the things you actually see is that there's an incredible amount of fear. There's an amount of fear, and a fear of what? You can do a continuous list of what things are they scared of. It's everything from they don't know what's going on, they don't know what to expect. It's fear. And a lot of the fear, the focus of the fear is actually the ignorance. Not ignorance, not lack of capacity to understand, lack of intelligence, but the lack of information, lack of knowledge. And a lot of what our role is we can go ahead and cut off this and just do it straight talking. Let's just do that. Let's make it a little easier. Is that one of the things that it's really very important is the fear. And I'll speak from I'll inject my own personal perspective of it from various ways. One thing is, for example, is with my mother had had a stroke, and she had an operation for an aneurysm. And one of the things is you can never ever underestimate the amount of fear that not only the person going through it feels, but also the people surrounding them feels. And one of the things even more frustrating is that when you're dealing with people who are competent in their own areas of expertise, is that there's even a little bit more frustration of not being able to understand what's going on. And one of the things is that the only thing that really helps to alleviate that is to actually have a professional who's been through it once before or several times before, actually taking the time to acknowledge that there is a certain amount of lack of information, a certain amount of ignorance, and then also taking the time to basically educate. Because one of the things that one of the things too is that you never ever really realize that how much fear there is until actually you're put into that situation. Because for years and years and years, you never really realize it because you'd see people, but it's always a little bit of a distance. You don't really truly realize until you're in that situation how much actual fear there is due to a lack of understanding. So that's the first thing. The importance of that, first thing, acknowledging that that the people may not fully understand the situation they're going through. And then two, that the important role that we have in actually in educating. And three, there's sometimes too, there's also a certain amount of people too that won't, they will not come forward and really acknowledge the fact that they don't know or that they're scared. and that's one of the biggest things is actually just assume that there is a certain amount of lack of information and that they are experiencing a certain amount of fear, and really go on that assumption of basically bring them up to speed and basically make them little mini experts on the topic. Because if you make them little mini experts on the topic, it actually makes everything go a lot smoother. When you're dealing with a client, like as far as attorneys goes, the more educated you make your client at the early stages, it works a lot better all the way through. Because one of the things too is that when you're dealing with, for example, and I'll bring the personal example of bringing it with attorneys, is that it's always funny is to ever have attorneys who are like the target of other attorneys, who are actually either the subject of a lawsuit. And it's really kind of funny to hear attorneys talk about the frustration, the fear about not knowing what's going on and not being able to control having a little bit of loss of control of their life. So that's the one thing that's actually very, very important. Now, one of the things that actually happens, which we actually do see, we will see it sometimes where you'll have actually despair will actually set in. There actually will be a certain amount of loss of hope when you don't educate the person enough to bring them up to speed about what to expect, and then also what's going on in their own life. The fear, if it goes on long enough, actually you will start seeing despair and hope, and we'll actually have all these other negative side effects. Because sometimes as a physician, as an attorney, you'll go in and you'll see these people, and you'll have these talk to these people, and you'll realize that like their healthcare provider, their physician, their social worker, their caseworker, haven't done an adequate job of really bringing them up to speed and educating them. And we're actually kind of seeing the side results of that lack of education. You're seeing the fear really kind of getting out of control, and actually seeing despair and actually a loss of hope kicking in. And there, when that does kick in, there's also the huge negative possibility that the person does give up. The person does give up about their own situation. They do give up about their own care. Some of the fight goes out of them. Especially when they're facing many difficult options. When you're facing a situation when you can go, when you're basically saying you have 5 courses of action and all of them are difficult and all of them are bad, and one of them is just doing nothing and just basically rolling over and just giving up. Lots of times that information and actually helping control some of the fear actually does a tremendous amount to actually give them the perspective to make the right decision on which way to go. Now, one of the things is that I don't know how many people who are listening in the audience have actually ever been in the military in some way. One of the things in the military, because I was in the reserves for a short period of time, and one of the training aspects was that they actually had a course just acknowledging that everybody has fear, and that the person who says that they don't fear is actually a fool, because everybody has a point when they feel fear, and everybody has a point where they panic. And one of the things that they always said was that the only way you really control fear is actually being self-aware of your own fear and actually information. Actually information and actually imposing your intellect, actually imposing your reason over your emotions through a difficult situation will actually get you through that and keep you from falling into despair. And that is one of those situations that can never ever be de-emphasized, is the role we have as basically as pathfinders. Basically telling them we've been here before, we know the layout, we'll show you the way where to go, what to expect, and also teachers. So that's one of those things that can never, ever, ever be de-emphasized. The next thing is, it's also one of the things is not only educating them about their situation, the other thing that's really, really important is to educate them about their options, good and bad. Because that is one of those things that it's basically, if it's going to be an intelligent decision, they have to understand where they're at. They also have to understand what options they have, which choices they have. And one of the things too is that we have the duty of telling them which situations are better and which situations are worse for them. Because that's actually one of the things is not only you don't turn around and give somebody, basically throw them all the options and without any guidance. Because one of the things, again, that's where our expertise, our background comes in, is basically telling them these are your options, but there are good options, and there are better options, and then there are terrible options. And that is something that is very, 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 very important. We have actually seen extremes. We've actually seen extremes on this situation. We've actually seen it where people will actually they either won't give them the options, they'll tell them this is the way it is, and that's it. It's this way or no way. And that's not a good way to go, because there's even if you're pretty sure that is the way they have to go, they at least need to be made aware of that there are other options. Okay? The other thing we have seen where people make a terrible mistake on is that basically they give them all the options and they give them no guidance. Now that one is terrible too. It's to tell them you have 5 options, 5 ways to go, but and then they don't give them any information about which way is better, which way is, because nothing you ever hear is more complaining about saying that they were put in a position of having to drag information out from either like the social worker, the lawyer, the doctor, about, okay, you told me I have 5 ways, what do you think? Please give me some sort of guidance. Please help me, because then it goes right back into the fear and despair bit. Because basically, you give somebody information without any kind of framework about from your experience, what do you think is the best way to go? That actually is almost as bad as giving them no information at all, because you end up right back at the same point. Basically, they're overwhelmed. Now, this kind of goes right back into when you're giving people the options. One of the things too is that oftentimes we as professionals are sometimes not fully aware of is the imbalance of power. The imbalance of power between the person receiving the information and you. There's a huge, huge imbalance of power. For one thing is they're at a disadvantage because they're scared. They're at a disadvantage because they're going through the situation. They're at a disadvantage because they haven't been through this before. And you have seen it through other people. You may have experienced it through families. You've studied it. So you have much more of a sophisticated understanding of what these people are going through. And one of the things too is that you have all those advantages of power over them. And one of the things too is that sometimes if by not being self-aware of the imbalance of power, actually there can actually lead to some abuse or some problems. Because one of the things is that if you actually had 5 options available, if you actually came in and said, I think you should take course A, the odds are they will take course A because they have that much faith in you. And one of the things is that you always have to be very, very careful about it is that your focus always has to be, for one thing, you have to be self-aware that there is that imbalance of power. And then the second thing is you have to also be self-aware of how much influence you really can have over a person's decision-making. Because, and you can either be one way or another. One, you can affirmatively say, take course A. You can also basically, you can also maybe not say take course A, but you can say, you know, B, C, D, you know, you kind of just by not giving it, embracing it, by not being fully supportive of it or really giving a real enthusiastic thumbs up, you can actually steer people away from a decision. Now, one of the things you have to be very, very careful when you're doing that is there is a certain amount of that. There is always a certain amount of you steer them to what you think is the best course of action. But there always has to also be a certain self-awareness of your motivations. That basically your motivation always has to be focused on the person who's receiving the information. You always have to be focused on that person. Because if you ever turn around and lose sight about who you're representing or who you're trying to serve, you may end up having a problem where that decision making, that urging of taking course A over course B may actually take people the wrong way because basically your heart's not in the right place. And that's kind of a funny way of saying it, but basically that has to be, your focus always has to be on the person. Now, one of the things that happens is you'll end up in situations which are actually getting very, very complicated, especially when, in the purest way, you'll have one person come in with one simple problem, and you're the one professional that has to advise them or deal with them, and that's like heaven. But usually what ends up happening is it's not that simple. Usually you'll have a person who's impaired, and then you'll have maybe a spouse, and then you'll have children, and then basically none of them agree on any course of action. And then you'll end up having other professionals who have other factors, other considerations, and then they may overlap, and then they also disagree. And so you've got this very kind of a little bit of a chaotic situation, and then there you are in the middle of it. The thing is, for your part, you always have to keep where the focus is, And sometimes it becomes very, very difficult, especially when you have very, very divergent positions regarding the person who you're advising and a spouse or a person you're advising and children, which can be very, 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 very difficult. And what often happens is that sometimes when you're being true to the person that you're advising, you actually find yourself in a situation where you'll be viewed as sort of like the enemy. So in some ways there's a certain amount of courage to turn around, also basically always keep the focus on the person that you're advising. The other thing too, which is also very, very difficult, is once you go through the process of educating them, informing them of their options, and then helping them through that decision-making process, advising them on which course of action you think is best. Is the final thing is when they finally make the decision is making sure that decision is communicated to the people who need to receive it, and then also honoring it, which is sometimes extremely, extremely, extremely difficult. Because one of the situations you will oftentimes find as a professional is you'll have 5 courses of action that are available to the person, and you really think that the best way to go is to take course A. That is the best way. Everything can be done. You know, it's perfect. Course A is the best for them. You give them, and then you'll tell them course E is the absolute worst course of action, but it is an option. And then you go through the whole explanation of them, and then they'll come in, and then they'll say, "I want to do course E," and you just sit there, and you kind of like go, the one thing you always have to make sure they understood what they're deciding. But then when it's to that point when that's what they want to do, then there is a certain duty to basically follow through on that decision making. And it's one of the things sometimes that is the most frustrating things that you can sometimes experience. But if that's their course of action, then that's what they want to do. Like, for example, sometimes, which is very, very common, is when we're doing like a powers of attorney for people. We will always tell people that everybody knows who they trust. Everybody knows who they trust. Everybody knows who they don't trust. That doesn't mean you don't love your kids. That doesn't mean you don't love your spouse. But everybody knows who you trust and who you don't trust. Everybody knows their propensities to get in trouble or not get in trouble. And we will basically go through, somebody will come in and say, I need to have a power of attorney drafted. So you go through the process of basically telling them, okay, you need to pick, not everybody needs a power of attorney. If you need it, then you should pick somebody who you trust. And in some ways, if you don't have anybody you trust, you may be one of those rare people who may be better off having nothing. Because if you don't have anybody, if you're basically handing the keys to somebody who you don't have any faith in, you may be better off risking it, having nothing, and going through a guardianship. But you go through that whole process of explaining to them, and then you go through a process of having them kind of describe their family. And usually people are very, very honest when they may not overtly say, well, I don't trust my son. But by the way they describe their family situation, you can kind of get the feeling that they don't trust their son, or the son has a problem. And then when you go through the process of saying, okay, who do you want to be your agent? They'll say, I want my son to be my agent. And then you'll say, but you already described your son as having a drug problem, a gambling problem. You already described your son as somebody who you can't really rely on. But you want to put them in a position of high trust. And then it goes back to the situation, okay, are you sure you understood the situation? Are you sure you understood what the process we were going through? And basically it's up to them to decide, and it's basically if they decide, yep, I want my son to be responsible for handling my money, handling my life, then basically there is little or nothing you can do. Because basically ultimately it comes down to it is their decision. And you may not agree with it, but that is their decision. Now, there always comes a point where the decisions are actually offensive to you, and which is common. You define that they want to take a course of action that you find to be inappropriate, immoral, you're uncomfortable with it, and in that kind of a situation, as long as it's can be done. And you can't do it. You don't feel comfortable doing it. You do have a duty too in there to basically inform them of your reservations, whatever they might be. And then basically, and if it's really, really so severe, and they really are depending on you to act on those, to help implement those decisions, then you may have the duty of actually getting yourself disconnected from that and bringing somebody else in to act in your role. So. We basically are cruising through this real well. So does anybody have any questions? Yes. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, as the director of nursing of a long-term
Yes.
care facility, I counsel with a lot of families
Yes.
who are at a point where we're looking at end-of-life comfort measures or putting in peg tubes or things to prolong the life of their loved one, and they always have questions, and we try to deal with those very honestly and straightforwardly. So that they do have the ability to make that decision. So if they were to decide, no, we don't want to do anything else, we want just end-of-life comfort measures, then say their loved one dies, are they going to come back and say, can they come back and say, you influenced me to do this when I really wanted to do the other thing?
Yes. To answer your question, maybe.
I mean, do you just have to have good documentation that you've talked about all of these options?
One of the things is when you're going through the decision-making process, which is a real serious problem, is one thing you have to determine whether the person has capacity to make decisions in the first place. And that right there is going to tell you whether or not you can even pursue that whole decision-making process through them. How lawyers look at it, and how the law looks at it, like through the guardianship proceedings and probate proceedings, is basically you try to keep the person as involved as possible in their own life. So basically, if a person has 10% ability to make decisions, you try to get that person to be heavily involved in that 10%, and then you rely on others to basically fill up the 90% that they're not able to make decisions on. So basically, a lot of it depends on their capacity to make decisions. If the person, ultimately it's always the person. So if the person is basically an end of life, and basically you're now making these difficult decisions about what treatment to accept and what treatment to reject, in those situations you have to determine what capacity that person has to basically go through that whole decision-making process. If the person is fully capable of understanding that decision about their end of life, that what treatment they can accept or refuse, and then the consequences of it, and they make an intelligent decision that they basically want to refuse treatment, that's actually the opinion you have to respect. It doesn't matter if the family's going to come in later on and say that they have opposite values. You're ultimately bound by the decision making of that person. Now, one of the things that about people coming in saying that you influence them, or it's one of those things that it has to be done in a manner that is more above board and open. Basically, where the information is provided. And where you have some sort of documentation where they sign off saying that it's understood. Because if you do any kind of a directive to physician, if you go through the signing procedures, if you do it well, you're going to go through it and you're going to explain, and there's going to be, if you do it with the notary and witnesses, which we like doing everything with notary and witnesses that way to kill any kind of that kind of exact problem. People say, well, no one told me, or he wasn't fully informed, or this wasn't what he wanted or she wanted. If you do it with more of a formal procedure where you have like a notary, witnesses, and you really take your time to go through it, actually that would kill a lot of your complaints or problems about saying that they never agreed, they never consented. But the question is about having it where people are going to come forward and challenge it. They will always come in and challenge it. That's one of those unfortunate things that, especially as decisions get more difficult, you always have somebody come in and say that they don't agree.
Seeing people challenge the competency versus incompetency that physicians are putting on things now that say they are not competent to make their health care decisions? Are you seeing a lot of challenges to that decision?
You do see some challenges, but generally there's an incredible amount of usually it's not so much the fact that a physician has said that a person does not have the ability to make decisions. Usually where we see usually where you have a conflict is two situations where we normally see. One is where you have a person who's operating kind of in a gray area, who basically is operating at a fairly high level, but they have they're lacking certain abilities to make decisions. You'll see that situation where basically they're refusing to acknowledge their own situation. Then usually you'll have it where they will challenge. They will say that the doctor doesn't know what he's talking about, or I don't know why they're trying to appoint a guardian for me. I'm fully capable of making my own decisions. You'll see that. And the other situation where you see is where you'll have like family members, where you'll have family members come forward and then they'll start causing problems. They basically, real common one is you'll have a person will go through a whole decision-making process with their physician, with their caregivers, with their family, and with their spouse, and then basically they'll have all this beautiful plan laid out for like end of life, and then you'll have like children come in from out of state, and then the whole thing just gets real nasty. Yeah, and then it becomes a situation of, well, what did they decide, and is this exactly what they wanted to do? But with that kind of saying about whenever you make a kind of like decision like that, it's always better to have more witnesses involved, people who can actually come in and basically verify that the explanation was made, that they understood what they were being told. Because actually, and also not do it in any kind of rush. So usually when people have problems, it's usually when it's done in a rush. Either like they have a time constraint where they have to get some sort of decision made quickly, or where they have to have a document signed quickly, and they shortcut on some of the information or some of the procedures, like as far as like explaining. Actually, the best way to do it is if you really don't shortchange yourself on the explanation, don't shortchange yourself on like the time, and actually it's better to have outsiders come in and kind of monitor it, see what you're doing. Any other questions? Yes? Is there a question?
You might want to ask them verbally so they can hear you.
Okay. Do I ask? Yes. Are there any other questions at any of the other sites?
We don't have any questions, and I'll ask them.
Okay. UT Pan Am? Any questions? Corpus, any questions? Del Rio?
Questions?
Okay. Del Rio? Kerrville? Any questions? Okay. All right, so to kind of wrap up, basically it's important never to de-emphasize, to really recognize the importance that we have as teachers. Because that is, I thinking, as the more and more I'm practicing law, that's actually turning out to be actually where your real value is at, is a teacher. Basically, you're the person who helps them know what's coming, what they're going through, and what their options are. And for that reason, as a teacher, it's important never to ever shortchange or shortcut or abbreviate what you're presenting to them. I mean, they're within reason. You have to be the judge as to what their capacity is to understand and present it to them in a manner that they can understand it. But that's something that can never, ever be de-emphasized. And then also the other thing, too, is never underestimate your power to subtly influence a person to go one way versus another. And because of the imbalance in power, and also they're in the middle of a crisis and you're not. And on that one, always keep the focus on the person who's receiving the information. And with that, always be careful that not to be tied up where basically your focus falls on what the family wants, not necessarily what the person wants. Because that always ends up being very difficult, because sometimes it becomes very blurred as to who exactly, who wants what and who you're representing. And basically that's it. Oh, I guess we could do that. Okay. I guess this is a commercial. This is the commercial now. My office has organized a series of talks that goes on every 4 months here in the San Antonio area. And it's primarily targeted towards consumers of nursing home services and their family members. And what it primarily is done is to basically educate people about what to expect from nursing homes. And also so basically who to complain to if there is a complaint. And because one of the things we're seeing is that oftentimes people wait too long. And also people don't know what their options are. And so basically this is basically to disemploy lawyers seminar. So basically so there is no problem, catch it early so people don't go through these horrible crises, and then basically overall the care should improve if everybody actually become more of an advocate for their own care and actually do more to agitate to improve care. Oh, okay. All right. The other thing too, and the participants of it is local San Antonio Bar Association, Almere Council of Governments, the Ombudsman Program, who are the nursing home advocates, my office, and a couple of geriatricians here locally. Dr. Zeitlin, one who's been tremendous, and also University of Texas Health Science Center have been tremendous in helping us. And we're taking it on the road. We're taking it to Dallas. So I don't know how that's going to work. Yes, yes. It's open. It's free of charge every 4 months. And we can provide information by anybody can contact us. For information, and it's on our handout. It's our address and our phone number, and you can just give us a call if you have any questions about that one. So, thank you very much. So now they get a real long break.
No, that's great though.
Instead of the 5-minute break, they get a nice 15-minute break. So.
What goes up must come down. Spinning wheel, got to go round. Talking about your troubles, it's a crying sin. Catch a painted pony, let the spinning wheel